A few things to think about for aerobic training. Especially with the advent of fitness and where it's gone for the past 20 years or so, or 25, and this concept of intensity in fitness. A big thing that is on people's minds is to just get better within fitness, and the broad aspect of trying to get better within fitness that contains a whole bunch of different modalities has been fascinating to study. And the idea of it, I think we're only within the infancy of trying to understand exactly the improvements in those areas. I think the studying of various different kinds of one end of the continuum of muscle contractions and how those contractions occur and the effects on the body, I think have been well studied and established, not answered, but well established and studied. And I think on the aerobic continuum, it's been really well established and studied in those specific modalities. When we consider the idea of trying to become aerobic just in nature for everything, I think it becomes quite complex. And I don't want to make it sound like the term aerobic capacity seems simple, because to be able to improve the ability to be as aerobic as possible or to be sustainable as possible is the key thing that people should think about. And try to understand the definition first. So truly think about what is aerobic first, so that when you hashtag aerobic capacity, you say you're doing aerobic capacity, I really just want you to think about what it really is and just understand some of the pieces behind it. So when you say aerobic, you want to think of it as being sustainable without getting into the physiology and the background aspects of it. Where my mind goes on it is obviously quite broad, but I want you to say, is this a sustainable activity? And there's not just being sustainable as a goal for most people when they're trying to gain aerobic capacity, which is why I'm a big believer in volume, is that if it's not measured consistently, you can't only do a few different pieces of work and consider it sustainable. You also have to look at the dose response as to what happens to that person and how they recover from that activity, or what it leads to for subsequent training sessions. So let me give you an example. Someone does 1 minute piece of work hard, rests a minute, and they do that 3 times. And the rate of perceived exertion each set is very, very hard, okay? So at the end of the third piece of 1 minute, as in terms of the score, their score may have been the same distance achieved, same amount of work that was put into it. But by the third piece of 1 minute, they actually could not do a fourth 1 minute. Now, the 3 pieces of 1 minute were sustainable. So in the definition of sustainable activity, is that considered aerobic? Well, yes, it is. In terms of the effect that it has on someone for subsequent training sessions and their ability to recover and do another 1 minute, it's not sustainable activity. So the way you want to think about, what is truly aerobic capacity is a couple different things. When you're doing the training, you got to leave a little bit on the table each time. And most of the training for aerobic capacity should not leave your central nervous system in a state of fatigue where you can't do other variables that are connected to that training. Okay, so that's how you'll understand really the background of it and the benefits of it. When you look at aerobic capacity or just aerobic training and training intervals, which is another broad concept, I break that down to like 12 to 15 different areas of aerobic training based upon pace for coaches within CCP. But to understand a 2 minute on, 2 minute off interval for rowing, let's say, so if you're going to do rowing 2 minutes and then resting 2 minutes, you're doing it over and over, and let's say the volume accrues to being quite a bit. Then yes, that's aerobic work, especially if your meters scored per each 2 minute is good. Rate of perceived exertion is somewhat similar throughout the entire time. You could be under pacing, but it's still aerobic. Let's say you do 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sets of that. Then what you're doing in there is you're improving your aerobic intervals for rowing only. Now this does not mean that doing rowing intervals won't help in other characteristics, but this is how you can really comprehend how aerobic capacity in mixed modal training is ridiculously complex, because there's so many factors within aerobic ability that limits people to stay aerobic in other modalities. So when you train 2 minutes on a rower and 2 minutes off and you do it for 8 sets, you are increasing aerobic capacity That means how much aerobic shit you can put in one period of time. You're training it through aerobic intervals, but you're only getting better at aerobic intervals for rowing, okay? So this also can frustrate people because they're like, holy shit, well then how do I become more aerobic overall? If you're saying aerobic overall in terms of aerobic fitness, that means you need to do multiple modalities that make you aerobic within those. Now, the reason why people can get broken within that is they don't understand the stress that's imposed when people do aerobic work. And this is where it gets convoluted. And I explain it here in a couple different areas. The amount of stress that people have when they do a training interval is largely based upon perception. And this is where we can go down a deep rabbit hole, which we won't. But how you perceive stress largely dictates the dose response. So just think about that for a second, and then it'll give you a little bit of an understanding as to how people can possibly, through genetics, experience, training, whatever the case, they perceive stress at a different level. They may be able to do more intervals that maintain their aerobic. Okay, so think about that. The adaptation to it, so how fast or how slow people adapt to the aerobic intervals, can also dictate how aerobic you become. And then thirdly, can they actually improve? Which means all the shit that they do away from the training system actually allows them to adapt so they can keep improving the aerobic capacity that's put in place. So a couple things to consider when you're, first of all, understanding that when you train something interval aerobic wise, you're only improving that modality. And then secondly, you have to understand how a person perceives the stress, adapts to it, and improves based upon it in order to ensure you actually are doing aerobic work when it comes to putting it all together. When you're trying to improve mixed modal aerobic capacity, the thing that people have to consider is there's so many different pieces that you can put together to try to improve your aerobic capacity. And this is why we're such big pushers of volume for people who want to improve aerobic capacity in the perspective of fitness or fitness as a sport, okay? So if you're looking to just get healthier, if you're looking to just get a workout, if you're looking to just sweat and move and you're beginner or you're starting from zero, then yeah, anything that doesn't cause you more pain that you can adapt to a little bit that you move forward, well, that's just called improvement of fitness, and we can study ad nauseum as to what goes into that, and it really doesn't matter. If you're looking to improve your aerobic capacity such that you adapt after that initial honeymoon period, you are going to have to do smart training. That improves your ability to stay aerobic in anything that you do. And the reason why it gets complex when we do mixed modal aerobic training is that muscle endurance is the main limiter that prevents people with multiple different contractions of making themselves aerobic in mixed modal pieces. So let me give you an example. It seems very accepted today within aerobic capacity training for individuals to do swim, bike, row, run intervals, and they'll do a 90-minute workout with a bunch of different intervals, a work to rest ratio that's very similar, so they're maintaining aerobic ability, and the repeats are great. Yet when someone prescribes kettlebell swings, burpees, and double unders, and they do it in a 3-minute format, they rest for 1 minute, and they do it 8 times, then blasphemy. People are saying, oh my god, that's so much volume, you don't need to do that much volume to improve aerobic capacity. Well, actually, you do need to do that volume in mixed modal training to be able to be aerobic in mixed modal work. The good people within the sport of fitness can do that. And the people that are calling, that's way too much volume, they can't do muscle endurance and make it aerobic to make those intervals aerobic. So the concept of trying to improve within that mixed modal setting aerobically has to be tested. So that you could say, well, what's my limiter that prevents me from improving my mixed modal aerobic capacity? And I'm telling you, in most cases, it's volume and training age and muscle endurance capability and pacing. So if you spend more time under the hood, you keep practicing and not pushing threshold all the time, and you're still able to pace effectively so when you're not getting into red line and you can maintain those equal paces, then I would ask you to continue to do 2-minute, 3-minute, 1-minute intervals of mixed modal aerobic work, the same amount of rest period, and improve your volume. And then if you can add a whole bunch of modalities to it and get better at it, then improve your volume up to a point which maximizes relative to your lifestyle, and then you just add pace to it. This has been done for 60 years within an endurance model of trying to improve aerobic capacity, so we should be doing the same things within mixed modal work in order to improve that. And If you're just a user and that's a little convoluted, I'll go back to the specifics of it in a bit. Your coach, I would suggest you meeting with me and going through our program design course within CCP, because we go into it a little bit more detail, and you might get a bit more answers to it. I wanted to point out a couple things based upon what exactly that testing is, and if we could skew out this curve of power and time, it would make a whole lot more sense for what aerobic capacity is and what we're trying to improve. So if you look at the power and time curve, when people start off within a number of seconds, there's a really high option for power. I hope that makes sense. And as the curve goes down, you can see the difference between, the difference between, let's say 3 seconds and 12 seconds is, it looks like it's a lot, but the differential between power output is not that much here. This is what we call the middle zone, or the gray zone. The reason why it's gray is because look at the differential between power output in terms of where it sits on the curve. A very let's call it a gray area in terms of energy utilization, simply because of that, because of the variance in power over a period of time. So that's still being dissected in mixed modal training in order to be understood quite appropriately. But when it comes to aerobic work and trying to be sustainable, this looks like it's flatlined, when actually if I took this and drew it out on a larger scale, you'd actually get a line that looks something like that for power. So what you're looking to do really is to try to, and this could be theoretical for people just try to understand capacity, you're trying to understand where along this curve, because it's not linear like this for most people. Some people's curve end up being, looking something like this, or it can be the opposite based upon what time does and how time goes on. And the goal really is to try to improve your ability to create the best curve possible for as long as you can. And the way to do that is through training intervals, as we talked about, and improving volume within that. So if you're not looking to, as I said, win anything, then you can just do simple aerobic intervals and eat clean and do great weight training, and you're going to live long and prosper. If you want to truly improve aerobic capacity from your current setting to a future setting, then you have to figure out where you sit on this curve and try to understand where at fault you don't sit on that. Mentors of mine have been doing this for many years within the endurance realm, in which they'll pick apart a 400 meter up to a 5K time and look at limitations based upon that, and they can indicate what kind of things people need to work on based upon their 400, 800, 1500, 3K and 5K times, let's say within running, or even with rowing as well. And so if you can think about that, try to see where you sit aerobically for the amount of pace and tempo that fits for a 1 minute interval on and off repetitively. How do you fit for 3 minutes on and off repetitively? How do you fit for 5 minutes on and off repetitively? And then you can see exactly what your limitations are based upon those paces. And if you figure out that for something that's 15 to 20 minutes long, you can't maintain pace and output the whole time and it's mixed modal, then I'm telling you, most cases you need to do muscle endurance mixed modal training appropriately. And if you only do rowing, swimming, biking, running, then you will only improve your aerobic capacity for rowing, swimming, running, and biking for those specific intervals that you're going to do. So to put it all into detail for what is aerobic capacity, as you can see, that's a very challenging aspect of fitness to try to understand, but I need you as a person who's doing fitness or a coach who's going to be prescribing it to really understand what it is. It's sustainable activity that you're trying to fit into the shortest period of time. Aerobic training is those intervals that I spoke of. Aerobic capacity is trying to make as much shit in one period of time as aerobic as you can. So it's an aspect that we're trying to look for. If you're training 3 or 4 times a week and doing aerobic intervals, that's called aerobic interval training. That's not called aerobic capacity. Capacity training would be trying to fit as much as possible to one period of time. So you may go through a bunch of intervals and then test aerobic capacity after a couple of weeks, and would hope you'd have some improvements on that. Second point I wanted to make sure you remember is that training those intervals aerobically will only, because of the contractions and the type of stuff that's going on, it's only going to improve your aerobic potential with those modalities that you're choosing, which is the reason why someone can be fantastic on a bike for 90 minutes out in the hills, but then when they get into the gym and they do some push-ups and jump rope and step-ups, they're gassed after 3 2-minute intervals. And the reason why is that those muscle contractions are completely different to what they're doing for their local muscle endurance for their quads and their lungs out on the bike. So you can see that how many different repetitions and pieces of repetitions does that person need to do to get good at mixed modal training? And the answer is yes, a ton of it. And the way that you can improve it is not get over, don't overthink it by saying, holy shit, I have to do a whole bunch of different complexities of movements. Well, you do, but the one key thing you need to remember is to perceive it as aerobic and to make it as sustainable as possible. Because what we're talking about is trying to make things as sustainable as you can. So this is 2016, and mixed modal training in terms of its study and ideas has been going on really, I guess, the study of it, or looking at it in terms of how it populates within fitness, has probably been 10 to 15 years old. And ironically, we discussed this, or I thought about these concepts or ideas in 2007 and 2008, but it was not looked upon as being something we should investigate. So it's kind of ironic that today it's welcomed and everyone wants to discuss it. So that's just the way, that's another point I wanted to make, that's just the way fitness happens. Every 10 years, in another 10 years, someone else will come up with something that's called different than aerobic capacity and talk about how to train it more appropriately, and just tag people that are just really good at anything with that concept, and then make it seem like they're coming up with something new that actually has been done for 50 to 60 years in terms of aerobic training on itself. Another key thing to remember, who it applies for. So when someone starts out with training and let's say they're below zero, then anything they do that brings them back to zero is fantastic. So that just to remember, any kind of training that is taking someone from a dysfunctional state, they're not in good homeostasis, and they're out of balance, and they take them from that to bring them back to zero, then that doesn't mean that that program works. That just means that anything that they did brought them back to zero, okay? So you can market and sell and pump as much as this you want as a program, but I can show you 40 different programs at any time that took someone from below zero and got them back to zero, okay? Vegetarianism took people from there, yoga, bar method, Orange Theory, walking, yoga class, curves, CrossFit, whatever. They're all classified into something because someone was going down and it stopped them from going down, they brought them back to zero, okay? So does that work? Yes, it does work. Does it mean it's the best method? Well, not necessarily. How do you determine what the best method is? You go from a period of balance and homeostasis to getting better. That extends for a very long period of time. And so this is the piece that we're talking about here, is how to go from zero to better than zero. And simple principles in program design apply to that, in that if you want to become more sustainable, if you're a newbie within that sustainable activity, just remember that almost anything that you do is a stress response, and how you perceive it is going to make you linearly improve in terms of your adaptation. If you're an intermediate, you're going to start improving at a much smaller level, and that's where you just can't do anything. So if you just go into the gym and do anything 5 times a week and try to improve your aerobic system, it's not going to happen, because your nervous system is more developed, and now you have to train it appropriately relative to pushing and pulling in and out of the nervous system. And if you're advanced, as you know, you got to be really intricate as to how important aerobic capacity training is done. And if you're a really fast adapter and you're genetically really gifted, and you have great mechanics and all those things you do, then you're going to improve your aerobic capacity at that point in time. Why? Because you're really good at sustainable activity. And this is kind of flies in the face of the intensity model, where people say just be intense all the time, but it's well accepted because we should take it from all the advanced people that are really good. They're doing aerobic intervals all the time, 5 or 6 times a week, yet they're bleeding intensity wins in terms of that fitness model. Well, that only happens for beginners, and that's why it only works for those folks, because anything they do past zero forward looks like it's successful. So it's something I want you to be conscious of when you're trying to judge exactly what is good aerobic training when you do that. I know I'm a little over the place for it, but last point on it, you got to think about also the mechanics for aerobic training when you do it. You want to understand that if someone has great mechanical ability when they do any piece of work repetitively for a period of time, that piece of work can largely be expressed more metabolically because of great mechanics, which is the reason why, of course, we love the fact of trying to hammer on great mechanics before you try to build volume. So if people have a great metabolic base but poor mechanical structure, then yes, they can do mechanical work and it improves their metabolic efficiency, not because of volume, but because it makes them more efficient at get lower power outputs for when they do their aerobic training. So think about that. You can take someone who spits off energy all the time, who has unbelievable capacity, and then actually you don't improve their capacity, you actually just refine their movement, and now they can put out more power at a lower rate, but they can sustain for a longer period of time. So you really want to think about when you're doing aerobic intervals, are they mechanically sound for me? And if they are not, then make sure that you drop pace to make sure that you can make them sustainable as much as possible, or prescribe what is in those aerobic intervals that's effective for you to maintain pace. And if you can make sure that you create muscle endurance that's sustainable within those aerobic intervals, and you can do a bunch of intervals over a period of time, then that is an improvement in mixed modal aerobic capacity. And when you do these, ring muscle up, handstand walk, weighted pistol, triple under complex for 3 minutes, you rest 2 minutes, and you can't do the same work for the next 3 minutes, then you're not making those mixed modal pieces aerobic. What you're doing is threshold training, or if you just did a 7 rounds for time of that piece and your power output dropped per set, you're teaching your brain how to get tired with those specific pieces. And that's okay, a couple of times a month possibly, but if you're training it all the time, then you're just teaching your brain how to get tired, and you're actually not improving your aerobic capacity. You're teaching your body how to go threshold and put up with threshold over a period of time. If there's some things along with this that you want to more deeply to discuss with terms of aerobic capacity, or what it means or how to train it, just send us a question at opexfit.com. I'd be happy to answer it for you. And until the next time when we want to discuss something different, or it's another 10 years when it comes back around again and we want to look at it in a different light, then I'll speak to you then.